and hello. My name is Geno Samuel, and welcome back to Discographies, Yes, where I'll be looking into every studio album by Yes, giving an overview of the making of each one. Now, 2 weeks ago, we mentioned the kind of fragmentation of Yes. Yes, the band called Yes, lost John Anderson, who then formed Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, consisting of former Yes members, and made an album that you might say is more in tune with the type of music that Yes were making in the 70s. And even though Yes weren't performing, in a sense, you might say that there were two Yeses coexisting. The more pop-rock commercialized Yes West, which is what they came to be known as due to relocating their base of operations to California, and APWH, a more classic Yes-sounding lineup. Yes West had regrouped with Eddie Offord, actually, and were working on new material in addition to finding a new vocalist. Meanwhile, ABWH were writing songs and making demos for their second album, working together with musician, composer, and producer Jonathan Elias. However, after the band's label, Arista, heard the material that the band were working on, they said that none of it could be played on radio or could be released as a single, so they were kind of in a bind. They needed a single, really, so John Anderson went to Trevor Rabin for help. I Love Her Rabin was considered as the hitmaker. I mean, it kind of was, though, in a sense. Trev then gave Anderson a choice of 3 demo songs that he was working on, asking him to choose only one. Anderson instead wanted to use all 3, and also asked Rabin if he would be interested in contributing some vocals to the new ABWH album. So then they got into talks about combining both Yes West and ABWH, and this would help out pretty much everyone conveniently. Both bands wanted to record an album and go on tour, and in theory they could complete an album by combining the 2 unfinished albums being worked on by both bands. With John taking over lead vocal duties for both bands now, this would eliminate Yes West's need for a new singer too. And also, the whole 8-member lineup of Yes would no doubt draw huge crowds and possibly combine the fan bases of both the 70s and 80s Yes. This planned merger was met with resistance from Chris Squire, Steve Howe, and Bill Bruford especially, but nevertheless, management from Atco Records and Arista Records got into talks about combining both bands and drew up a 90-page contract to settle all the legal issues regarding turning over the music and the band members over to another label. So they managed to sign a 4-album deal with Arista. So what resulted from that union was Union, and the artwork from that album is actually back here. That one. And as you can see, Roger Dean came back for this album artwork design. Dean was asked to design a new Yes logo, so he did. It's this red square logo that I'm sure was inspired by official company seals in Japan, and maybe in other Asian countries too, but since I'm in Japan, I've seen this sort of thing lots of times. And even the letters Y and E have been stylized in such a way that they almost look like katakana characters, and I can actually read them kind of as So Mi. The S doesn't really look like anything though. Those seals are stamped onto the top corner of a page usually, and this is the way that this logo is included on this album cover. The front and center of the piece is the old 70s Yes logo. So you got 2 logos on the front cover, both saying Yes. Perhaps this metaphorically represents the union of both eras of Yes. But honestly, it just looks messy, like you couldn't decide on one or the other, so you just threw both of them into the mix. It kind of goes against the whole message of the album, Union, by keeping the logos separate instead of uniting the band under one symbol. And this ain't the only part of the album that goes against the concept of the album title. The album consists of 14 tracks on the CD at least. I think the vinyl release had 1 track less. 9 of the tracks came from ABWH, and 4 from Yes, and there was 1 guitar instrumental from Steve Howe. So the album isn't really all 8 members playing at once, like the Doobie Brothers or something, which is what I thought it was when I first experienced the album. This illusion of unity is further enhanced by Chris Squire's backing vocal contributions on most ABWH songs. Tony Levin played the bass and Chapman stick parts on the ABWH tracks. And if you look at the included booklet, you'll see a list of all the musicians who played on the album. And aside from the 8 Yes members, the record also had contributions from an astounding 20 extra musicians, including keyboardist Steve Porcaro from Toto and Billy Sherwood, who was in the running to become the next lead singer for Yes. This was a right old mess, with most Yes members not even playing together in the studio for the most part. and Anderson and Elias were at odds with each other for the majority of the recording process, with Elias wanting the band to sound more like 90125, while Anderson wanted to move as far from 90125 as possible. Furthermore, Steve Howe and Rick Wakeman were involved with other solo commitments at that time as well, and they recorded some parts for the songs and then sent them off to the studio. But Elias, and maybe Anderson too, weren't too crazy about their contributions, so they employed session players to record keys and guitar parts based on the recordings Howe and Wakeman made, and played them in a way that those guys would. Jimmy Hahn was responsible for basically emulating Steve Howe on the record. Jonathan Elias felt that the band needed to move on from the virtuosic, grandiose solos and egotistical displays of skill of the 70s, so that's why a lot of their parts were replaced. Howe called Hahn an average guitarist and compared replacing his parts with Hahn's contributions to having an abortion. It feels like the majority of the album was bits and pieces of song ideas that had to be Frankenstein together by this huge team of musicians. And all of you who know about Union know that this has a dreadful reputation, but nevertheless, I'm gonna give it a shot and not contribute any negative feelings without reason. So the album opens with I Would Have Waited Forever by ABWH. It starts off suddenly with the chorus of the song, like no intro at all. Really? This is how you're gonna start the album? The melody ain't great, legit just two notes. It sounds like a lovey-dovey song, and honestly reminds me of something the 80s just would do, a little bit. Then the chorus ends, and we jump right into a guitar-led riff that's kind of interesting, but it's such a drastic mood swing. It feels like the chorus and this guitar riff were two separate songs that were glued together because they were at the same tempo. The song switches things up again for the verses, featuring a funky rhythm resting atop a single chord. Just one chord for the whole verse, really. And there's also a bunch of random bloops and effects from synths that perhaps tried to recapture the magic of the horn stabs in Owner of a Lonely Heart. But it just sounds sloppy. What the hell is this mic setup? Like they added all those bleeps and bloops to make the verses more interesting. The accompaniment itself is boring, and Anderson sings an annoyingly monotonous melody. It feels like they had a guitar riff and the chorus, which meant that they needed a verse to keep it all together, and they made up one in about 8 minutes. After the verse, they do this little tribute to the ending portion of Roundabout, doing a similar doop 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 vocals. And then they suddenly go back into the chorus, now with a half-beat style drum beat and a very late 80s sounding gated snare. By the way, by the start of the 80s, Bruford had changed his style to one of a more conventional and simplistic drummer, and his contributions on this album end up sounding more like a drum machine rather than a drum kit played by a musician, since in addition to his style, he used a big old synth drum kit. It sounds pretty cool though. After the chorus, they take a leap into an acoustic guitar-led section, bringing the song down low. It's kind of a nice refreshing change that is then ruined by Steve Howe's riff coming back. Then back into the verses we go. The lyrics sound like Anderson wrote a paragraph of inspirational quotes that he tried to squeeze into a song. After the second verse, they introduce a new weird instrumental effects-laden dissonant transition into the rather pleasant-sounding chorus. Why? What's the point of adding so many bleeps and bloops of music that have no connection with the rest of the song? Anyway, we return to the soft acoustic section again, so I guess that justifies it existing just a little bit. But then onto Mellotron sounding the heart of the Sunrise Rising motif, and then onto a nice little interlude led by a noodly Steve Howe guitar solo. God damn, I did not miss Steve Howe. The rising motif keeps rising and aimlessly cycling round and round as Steve plays a bunch of notes. Then we get a sudden transition into the chorus again out of nowhere, and then they conclude the song with a major key variation of the guitar riff. It's nice and soft, and a surprisingly nice touch, I must say, which leads into the fade-out. And I'm actually not certain whether it's Steve playing this last bit. It sounds a bit different, but I could be wrong. It's 6.5 minutes long, this whole thing, and I'm trying to find a way to describe that. And this is a horribly designed composition that has maybe a couple of good ideas if they were all developed into their own songs, but if you put them all together, it's such an awful mess. It almost sounds like a poorly arranged medley of songs, but there are no songs plural. This is the one song. Somehow. Dear God. The second track is Shock to the System. It's got a pretty heavy guitar-driven sound and has a little big generator vibe to it, or a King Crimson perhaps. The riff is really cool, honestly. I was surprised to find out that this was also an ABWH song, and sounds a lot like what Trevor Rabin might come up with. The verses are okay, but they're not great. They do sound more developed and structured than the ones in the previous number. The lyrics consist of shock to the blank, and an elaboration of the aforementioned blank, like shock to the system, shock to the politician. The melody and tone of the song doesn't quite match John's voice. His delivery feels a bit forced and strained, and honestly I could imagine Rabin singing the song and pulling it off, though unfortunately he said that he absolutely hated the song. The main riff comes back a lot, maybe a bit too often. The pre-chorus instrumental doesn't really match the heaviness of the song and sounds like a typical subpar Steve Howe lick. I kinda love the chorus though. The chord progression and the melody, though again, the singing is a bit weak and misplaced. The bit after the chorus, this largely instrumental bassless bit with cool sounding shock, shock. That's cool. That's cool. After a bit of that, they transition into a quiet acoustic rendition of the chorus. Again, just like in I Would Have Waited Forever. It's almost like they were trying to inject this feeling of And You and I into every song in a futile attempt to yesify the tracks. There's a not great guitar solo later on, but what are you gonna do? The bass line and drum beat remain pretty rudimentary throughout the track, and synth strings keep the chords in check. Again, I'm not sure whether this is actually Rick playing the keys here. Like, is this something he would actually do? Overall, it's a pretty good track. Of course, it can be better, but as it stands on the record, it's not bad. Yeah. Next is Masquerade, a Howe acoustic guitar solo, which actually received a Grammy nomination for Best Rock Instrumental Performance. It's quite pleasant, and it reminds me of my days of sitting on the porch in my rocking chair, looking out at the sunset while sipping on my cold glass of rhubarb juice. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I've never experienced that in my life. It's a nice track and easygoing piece. I'll take it. The fourth track is Lift Me Up, the first song by Rabin era, yes. This song is all Rabin really. It begins with a cool synth percussion loop that leads into a heavy mood led by a great overdriven guitar riff and huge booming drums featuring some fast 16th runs and all that neat old stuff that lets you know pretty much right away, yeah, this is Trev. He used this tried and true arrangement method of playing the riff on electric and acoustic guitar together, and we heard this before on the previous two albums. It achieves a really delicate but strong sound. The instrumental break here in the beginning is superb. When it stops, the tone of the song changes to a more soft sound as it opens up into the song proper. Acoustic guitar picking throughout, and featuring some lovely lines from Squire's bass rising up in the mix. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Look around! Ding, ding. Got no place to stay! Doo-doo-doo-doo. Gonna hate this town! Depending on the day. John takes the first verse, and followed by Trevor, who then sings lead for the rest of the song. The song is a plea for help from the point of view of a homeless person, and that's okay. It's not explicitly preachy in the lyrics, and it's vague enough that you can apply it to lots of situations and emotions, and make it all relatable. Some wonderfully huge harmonies in the choruses. The second chorus switches things up in the arrangement by replacing the more varied bass line to a pulsating one, steadily playing 16ths on a single note, creating this amazingly intense mood with the most simple of arrangements. The track stays equally as cool the whole time really. No real bridge section to speak of, apart from the instrumental high energy intro. It's just verse, chorus, chorus really. It's very enjoyable, and solid vocals from Trevor. The hook in the chorus, lift me up and turn me over, is really strong. Lead me on into the dawn, take me to the highest mountain, tie me up, loving and strong. Then at the end, they do a light revisit of the intro segment to finish things off. and bring it full circle. It's rich in riffs and melodies, and is probably the strongest track on the whole album. It was a big hit single actually, one of the band's most successful ones, and they filmed a music video too, with all 8 members participating, even though like half of them had nothing to do with the song. Anyway, with that great song out of the way, we get to Without Hope, You Cannot Start the Day, which legitimately starts wonderfully. It's a beautiful melody and lyrics accompanied by a soft piano and soft pad. There's a tasteful delay effect on the vocals and adds a lot of depth to the singing line. And this kind of delay you actually hear throughout the album. I guess this was the Elias touch. Apparently, Elias and Anderson asked Wakeman to record something based on this basic chord idea they had for this section. And what he recorded and sent to them, Elias likened to a Rachmaninoff piano concerto, which was not at all what they wanted. What they wanted was something simple, so I think Jonathan Elias ended up recording the keyboard part himself. And I can see why. Wakeman's flamboyant touch would have ruined this quiet, sad, foreboding piece. Legit, I find myself singing this bit to myself a lot. Only you can tell it. Only you can say it. It's so lovely. But the way it ends, after about a minute and a half, it sounds like almost the end of a song. The music slows down and decays into a natural ending. Then it starts back up again with the full band now, playing a fairly heavy 2 power chord riff that sounds too much like City of Love. And I'm also questioning whether there's any Steve Howe or Rick Wakeman on this track at all. I'm pretty sure all of the guitar work is from Jimmy Hahn. The arrangement also prominently includes the now familiar synth drums from Bruford. The verses are quite boring and off-putting. The chorus is also thoroughly monotonous and annoying. It feels like the verses and choruses are just there to call this thing a song, like they left a bunch of blank tape here saying, this space for the verse. Do something. It's very repetitive and uninteresting. The vocal line almost sounds like a rap song from the late 80s, but they performed it with a boring melody instead. After a couple of runs from verse and chorus, we get a new major theme serving as a bridge. That's quite hopeful, it rises musically, and it sounds quite positive even though it ain't great. It sounds so much better given what came before it. It falls back into the old riff pretty quickly though. They slotted in another gentle acoustic break here, like every ABWH song has this, in an effort to make these songs more yes. Then they build up the vocals towards an eventual climax. Then towards the end, Bruford plays aimlessly, like some improvised beats. At the end it sounds like nobody knows what the hell they're doing. It started off so promising, but everything after that intro segment has nothing at all to do with the intro. I kinda want to remake this song, basing it all on the intro theme instead. Maybe it's still salvageable. But we can work past this. The next track is Saving My Heart, a Rabin composition. It begins with a synth drum loop that carries on for almost the entire song. As the rest of the band join in, they establish this easygoing reggae feel to the music. Like legit reggae. There's a prominent organ line for the whole song, but I'm not sure whether that's actually Kay. It could be Rabin. The melody in the verses is okay. It's led by Anderson with some harmonies from Rabin. The chorus, on the other hand, is friggin' beautiful. The lyrics are amazing, cheesy but so heartfelt. A huge vocal choir consisting of like at least 10 separate singing lines belts out a great melody. Big range from baritone to the really high falsetto harmonies. Then the epicness falls back a lot for the verses. And then again a sudden change over to the powerful chorus. It's definitely a sing-along for the ages. Though there is this one bit in the chord progression of the chorus that I disagree with. I'll try to show you. Okay, it's this bit. Till the blood in my veins run dry, I'll be there to testify. There's a place in my heart for you. I think that switch over from the D into the C, or at least in my case is from the D to a C. That should be in the second inversion, I feel. Let's compare. Till the blood in my veins run dry, I'll be there to testify. There's a place in my heart for you. Sounds better, right? I think it sounds better. And I think they played it that way in the live version, but I might be wrong. I might be misremembering. Trev takes over for the bridge. Great powerful delivery on vocals. He then ushers in a key change for the song, and the following chorus sounds huger than before, and now complete with a very slap-sounding snare. Then they change back to the original key for a pretty solid guitar solo. and then back into the higher key for the endless cycle of the chorus into the fade out. It feels like the chorus loops were done artificially, like they took this one chorus and copy and pasted it a few times into the fade out, as if the band didn't have enough time to finish the song off properly. It's a really good song overall, but I just have some issues with the arrangement of it. Namely the drum loop. Wish that it wasn't there, and that it was a more organic sound going on instead. But the composition itself is great. Next is Miracle of Life, the last Rabin composition. It's got a kick-ass booming start, full band, no BS. Full of fast riffs on both acoustic and electric guitars, and a cool organ pattern. This feels like classic Yes, even though this was all Rabin. He made a demo of the song first, and this sounds near identical. And I think Squire is credited as the bass player for this track, though for the most part it doesn't really feel like him. It sounds like a bass line played on synth actually. The way that the band stops to allow for the vocals to sing out, "Hold on to the miracle of life," and then back into the full band rhythm. It reminds me of a similar scene in Close to the Edge. And there's a Portuguese guitar-like section here too, though it's Rabin playing something else. He really did his best to replicate what perhaps the 70s Yes would do in the early 90s. And seems like it paid off because Steve Howe said that the song was pretty good. The intro movement is in 17/8 time, and it suddenly changes about 2 minutes into the song proper. It's a regular steady beat in 4/4, simple chords. The verses and choruses largely sound the same, and honestly it's a bit of a disappointment. It reminds me of the basic AF verses from the previous ABWH tracks. John starts off the singing, and then gives the singing torch over to Rabin for the pre-chorus. A refreshing, rich arrangement full of sparkly guitar lines and chords. Even though the chord progression in the verse and choruses is the same, the feel thankfully is a bit different. It's a very cool melody, but just maybe not the best arrangement in the backing track perhaps. The breakdown section serving as the bridge is all abstract and full of very choppy sounds and vocal samples. Anderson shouts out place names like Pacifica, India, Atlantica. Then back into the chorus we go, looping into the eventual fade out. It goes on for quite a while, but thankfully Trev brings out some big solos to vary up the mood. Some sluggish, some more standard and virtuosic, and also features some soft jazzy runs too. Then faintly you can hear some instrumental motifs from the intro segment bleeding into the mix, like the organ and the cycling rising rhythm of the guitar. Maybe this set of choruses goes on for a bit too long. It's pretty good, though I think the first 2 minutes are a lot greater than the rest of the song. Next is ABWH's Silent Talking. Opens with mysterious chords on soft strings. They're the type of chords that you would only play in the early 90s, this sort of demented cousin of 80s smooth jazz. There's some great interplay between these ominous chords and a complex bass and guitar riff in an odd time signature that I couldn't be bothered to calculate how many 16ths there are in there. It's probably an odd number. This whole bit reminds me of the first part of Heart of the Sunrise, like this is an updated copy of that. The snare sound is quite striking, full of reverb, and sounds so dreamy. It's quite infectious, and it kinda makes me wanna hear some lo-fi songs with that snare sound all over them. As they're going on with this riff that rises in intensity with the help of keys, somehow Anderson joins in singing this messy melody on this pretty intense and complex instrumental. Like, why is this happening? It's clear, at least in my mind, that they had this riff going, and someone decided to turn this into a song for some reason, instead of leaving it as an instrumental. And it sounds so really not good. The vocal line is so aimless, and it has no business being there. Imagine if Anderson started singing during the opening of Heart of the Sunrise, as the band is going wild. Love comes to you, and you follow, lose one, on to the heart of the sun. Why is this happening? About 2.5 minutes in, the song changes to a completely new song, now feeling more harmonious and settled, as John sings, Silent Talking, yada yada. His voice track is full of delay, like in the previous tracks, though it sounds a bit too overbearing here. We get a soft acoustic section, again, and soft keys keeping the chords in check. There's like 4 to 8 lines in this section of the song, which then repeat into the very end. This is one of the biggest messes of the whole album. Just these 2 unfinished, isolated ideas that were glued together to make this into a track of reasonable length on this album. The riff at the beginning is legit pretty cool though, and I think Howe took this and maybe 1 or 2 other guitar ideas off this album with him to later incorporate them into his solo album. But yeah. Horrible. Horrible. Next is The More We Live, Let Go, which is a song that was written by Chris Squire and Billy Sherwood, their first collaboration, performed largely by Yes West. It's got a really mysterious vibe, so full of synths. It sounds like 1992 to me. Sherwood recorded the bass line himself for the demo with the intention of having it replaced by Squire, but Chris refused, stating that he loved the way Billy played it. So that's nice. John has a great melody to sing here, and you can really hear Sherwood in the verses, doing this call and response thing with John. It's atmospheric all around. They do a slow build-up of voices, as they are known to do now, but it's tastefully gradual and does not let up until the last chorus of the song. It's quite skillfully accomplished. Chris Squire sings the choruses, which also exhibit this call and response arrangement, though I don't think it's Sherwood singing the responses in the chorus. The voice sounds a bit different. And it's no Yes member either. The lyrics are rather hopeful, though the tone of the music remains mysterious and dark, creating this interesting contrast. There's more of that spacey, echoey snare sounds that I've grown to love. And God, the harmonies get so huge. Everyone's vocals are so powerful. After reaching the wonderful climax in the final chorus with a profound "Let go," the arrangement slowly but surely descends and settles into an ominous, dreamy ending. It doesn't really sound like Yes, though apparently it is, but it's really great. I actually made a cover of this song years and years ago during my teenagers. I was pretty proud of it at the time, but now of course it sounds absolutely terrible. It's good fun though, one of the strongest songs on the album. Next is Angkor Wat, named after the Cambodian temple. It was written by Elias Anderson and Wakeman, and no one else really had a part in this song. It opens with some keyboard gargling sound effects. It's just keyboards for so long doing these abstract themes and soundscapes with no rhythm to stick to. John eventually joins in and starts to turn this ambient instrumental track into something of a song. I'm not digging Anderson's melody here. It feels unfocused and hard to appreciate when Wakeman keeps making these ethereal fart noises throughout the entire track. The lyrics are the usual Anderson mysticism jargon that's totally lost on me. After lots of vocal meandering, Steve Howe joins the chat and contributes some backing vocals. Then they all sing the only part of the song that I can remember. Return to the center, Angkor Wat. I kinda like that bit. After the singing finishes, we get a Cambodian poem recited by one Pauline Chen, who leads the song into the fade-out. This would kinda maybe be okay if more of the album sounded as out there as this track. Maybe I'm the wrong audience for this, but it just feels so pointless. Next up is Dangerous, open parentheses. Look in the light of what you're searching for, close parentheses. Jesus, that title. It opens with yet another goddamn 2 power chord City of Love wannabe guitar riff. That almost sounds like a synth guitar. Just sounds really unnatural. The beat of the track is almost a hip-hop beat, and overall it sounds like Yes West. Like, I was legit surprised to look this up and found out that this isn't Rabin on guitar, and it's probably Jimmy Hahn actually. The verses are kind of okay. It's got a peculiar echo effect going on in the vocals to add emphasis to John's vocal lines. Though at the same time it feels really like they're just dicking around and repeating this simple little phrase over and over again just to make it into a verse and make the song longer than 3 minutes. The vocals get really big in the chorus. The backing instrumentals are largely synth-based and kinda interesting, like full of flute sounds and stuff. It sounds very oriental actually. Things get a lot more interesting after the second chorus. They introduce new themes, this buildup of voices, and a beat breakdown, all while dense voices overlap all over the place. There's an odd section that's just a synth drum beat plus lots of percussion. Sounds like this should be accompanied on stage with a break dancer showing off their moves while getting down onto the floor. There's plenty of techno key stabs, further adding to the early 90s hip-hop vibe. It's kind of okay. It just feels misplaced on this album, and I think there's a decent song hidden in here somewhere, but it shouldn't be Yes performing it. I remember really liking this song in my younger days, and this actually inspired an original song of mine that actually didn't end up sounding much like this at all. It's not been made public. Don't ask me. After this, we get Holding On. It opens with a looping sequence of vocals singing, "See the searching, see the people, see the searching, see the people." It's all vague and mystical, trust me. It's got an arrangement here that's very typical of this album. These big complex chords on synth strings and some more of those wonderfully spacey distant drums so full of reverb. It sounds kinda moody and aimless from the beginning, and only gets more pointless with the rest of the band showing up. Howe starts playing a guitar pattern that's really not succeeding in not sounding like I would have waited forever. The guitar tone, the style, the tempo, the tonality. This whole song is like when a band sees a hit single and decides to make a song that sounds a lot like it to capitalize on its success. But this is the same band. The verses have a more empty, dreamy feel, very 1992. It's just one chord sustained for the whole thing, maybe two chords actually. It's all so profoundly pointless. I can't believe it. The choruses sound a bit more different, but they're not very good. The mixing gets weird here. The vocals that go on like, stop that, stop that thinking out loud. They feel too wide actually. This whole bit sounds very tacked on and made in a rush just to fit into the song. Stop that chorus. It just sounds messy, vocally and instrumentally. After a verse and chorus, it sounds like the band were just throwing out musical ideas hoping something sticks. John spitting out rhymes, Howe or maybe Han gives us a mediocre solo. Then towards the end, a new rhythm and pattern and a new guitar sound gets introduced. And honestly, it's quite good, like... It might be a keyboard playing a clean guitar sound actually, I'm not sure. The band sing, holding on repeat until the fade out puts the song out of its misery. Jesus, what a mess. It feels like every single ABWH song contribution is just bits and pieces stuck together. Thankfully, the next track is a bit more straightforward. Evensong is an instrumental track performed by Tony Levin on his Chapman stick and Bill Bruford on tuned synth percussion. It's 52 seconds long. The recurring dreaminess of this album returns here too. It's an interesting sound, and if it were as long as an average song, you could use this for meditation or something. It's pretty nice. So this takes us to Take the Water to the Mountain, the final track on this album. The beginning is pretty cool, full of dark synths and a foreboding bass drum trying to introduce the beat. Guitar comes in playing some distant notes here and there. They leave this mood behind with no real transition and lay into the song portion of the song. Take the river to the mountain. The river comes back. It's a lovely melody. It's a fairly low range for Anderson, but he carries it beautifully, with a pleasant confidence. After a while, synth percussion comes in, creating a cascading tribal feel. The instruments for the most part take it easy. Then they do a key change upwards for the next verse, and the intensity rises as well. The basic verse structure remains the same throughout. Then they go up again, now introducing an African native tribal kind of feel. You hear it in the beat, the percussion, and backing vocals too, singing like an African choir. The song sounds hopeful, and I'm wondering to see where this is going. Then something explodes, and that mood is killed completely. In come dark, foreboding deep notes on keys. The song takes on a free rhythm, eerie quality. Then John comes back, trying to do his best imitation of a crow, I kid you not, like, ka-ka, ka-ka. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And the song starts to fade out. What? You can't be serious. This can't be how you're actually going to end your album. What the hell is this? The song felt like it was getting somewhere, and then I guess they didn't have time to take the river to the mountain or something, and quickly laid down this stupid caw-caw, caw-caw. Caw-caw, more like. So that's the end. Oh my god. Squire quite rightly called it a salvage job. It's quite a shame that the Yes West songs are actually pretty good, but they're buried under all this ABWH/Elias crap. Not good. I actually had to calculate my rating for this album as a whole by first rating each song individually, and then adding all that up and turning it into a score out of 10. And the resulting score is 5.7 out of 10. You should thank Rabin and Sherwood for offering the best tracks on here, and bringing the score up a whole lot. As expected, when the album was released in April 1991, reception was mixed to negative. The band too pretty much unanimously hated the album. Bruford firmly declared it as the single worst album he has ever recorded, and Rick Wakeman jokingly called it Onion, because it makes him cry every time he hears it. But yeah, even though the album itself is pretty bad, and acknowledged as so by most everyone, the Union tour, featuring all 8 members playing live together, was damn super. Rabin and Wakeman actually developed a special bromance on tour, but Steve Howe and Trev, though, never got along. And I think it's quite funny how whenever they played Owner of Lonely Heart on that tour, Steve would leave the stage. He would have no part of it. And I wonder whether it is because it's Yes's biggest hit and it doesn't have him in it, or that he thinks that it's such a disgracefully bad song. Honestly, I don't think it's that much different from the tracks he recorded with Asia, like Heat of the Moment. It sounds pretty similar. Union is probably the band's worst album in terms of song strength, but the tour was one of the highlights, I think. And after they finished it, Wakeman, Howe, and Bruford went their separate ways again, and Bruford rejoined King Crimson, and Yes returned to the classic 80s lineup. So of course, this wasn't the end of Yes, and they made a new album in 1994. So how did that one turn out? Well, I'll be taking a look at the band's 14th studio album, Talk, next Wednesday. So thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe for more original music and music reviews. Special thanks to my patrons, and if you're interested in contributing, there's links to my Patreon and original music in the description down below. Thanks again. See you around. Because since I'm in... Shit. I forgot... Fuck!